Hello everyone and welcome back to the MTG Novels Project. The MTG Novels Project is available both on YouTube and as a podcast version. Check the description for more details. A legal note. This is an unofficial audiobook with original content belonging to Wizard of the Coast. This content is covered under Wizard of the Coast 2017 fan content policy. Listener discretion is advised. Today we continue with Chapter 12 of Planeswalker by Lynn Abbey. Urza was an honorable man, and an honest one, even when he'd been an ordinary man, if the word ordinary had ever applied to Urza the Artificer. Urza had no great use for romance or affection, but he tolerated friendship, one friend at a time. After Xantcha had pushed him out of Phyrexia, he'd accepted her as a friend, and in the 3,000 years since, Xantcha had never asked for more, nor settled for less. They'd stumbled through 3 worlds before the day during which Urza had ridden his dragon to Phyrexia ended. Xantcha was seedier than Urza by then, which meant they were leaning against each other when Xantcha released her armor to the cool night mist. There were unfamiliar stars peeking through the mist and a trio of blue-white moons. "Far enough," she whispered. Her voice had been wrecked by the bad air of 4 different worlds. "I've got to rest." "It's not safe. I hear him. Yogg." Xantcha cringed whenever Urza started to say that word. She seized the cuddling substance of his ornately armored tunic. "You're calling the ineffable. Never say that. Never do that. Every time you say that name, the ineffable can hear you. Of all the things I taught you in the faint of flesh, that one I believe with all my strength. You'll never be safe until you burn that name from your memory." Sparks danced across Urza's eyes, which was a featureless black, since she dragged him away from Phyrexia. Xantcha didn't know what he saw, except that it had spooked him, and anything that unnerved Urza was more than enough for her. Urza took her suggestion to heart. Heat radiated from his face. Wait, not, want not. If he could literally burn something from his memory, he could probably survive it too. Still, she put more distance between them, leading him by the wrist to a rock where he could sit. "Water, Xantcha. Could you bring me water?" He was blind, at least to real things. His vision, he said, was all spots and bubbles, as if he'd stared too long at the sun. There had been no sun above the force sphere, but the dragon had been the target of all the weapons, sorcerers, elementals, and all the demons could aim. "You'll stay right here?" she asked. "I'll try." Xantcha asked what he meant. She set her own feet on enough worlds to have a sharp sense of where she could survive and where she couldn't. Phyrexia and the 3 worlds after Phyrexia were inhospitable, but this 3-noon world was viable. She had her cyst, her heart, and tucked inside her tunic, an ambulator. If Erna vanished before she returned, it wouldn't be the end of her. Heavy rains had recently fallen. Xantcha saw water at the base of the hill where they emerged from between worlds. Carrying it was another matter. She quenched her thirst from her own cup hands, but for Urza, she stripped off her tunic, sopped up the water, and carried it, dripping up the hill. Urza's attempt to remain seated up a rock had been successful. Silhouetted against the soft-lit night sky, his shoulders were slumped forward. His chin had disappeared in the shadows of his armored tunic. His hands lay under his lap. "Urza." His chin rose. "I've brought you water, without grace or dignity, as long as it is wet." She guided his hand to the sopping cloth. "Quite wet." Urza sucked moisture from the cloth, then wiped his face. When he'd finished, he let her tunic fall. Xantcha sat at his feet. "Is there anything more I can do for you? Will you eat? Food might help. I smell berries. It's summers here." He shook his head. "Just sit beside me. Sleep if you can, child. Morning will come. A summer morning." Xantcha thought on her tunic. The night was cold, not cool. The garment was uncomfortable, nothing worse. Discomfort was nothing unfamiliar. She got comfortable against the rock. Urza shifted his hand to the top of her head. "I told you to stay behind. I did, for a little while. It could have been hurt. I might have left you in Phyrexia forever." Urza was Urza, at the center of his world and every other. On a night like this, after they survive, his vain glory was reassuring. Sancho relaxed. It went otherwise, Urza. I was neither hurt nor left behind. I'd still be there, but for you. You'd be dead, Urza, if you can die, or in the seventh sphere, if you can't, wishing that you could. The seventh sphere, is that the place where, he hesitated, wherein the ineffable punishes demons? Yes. Then I should thank you. Yes, Sancho repeated. And you should have listened to me when I told you what waited in Phyrexia. I will build another dragon, bigger, stronger. I know where Phyrexia is now, tucked across a fathomless chasm. I have never seen it walking. I wouldn't see it now, but I know I can go back. They will die, Sancha. I will leap them like a field of overripe grain. The day of Mishra's vengeance is closer today than yesterday. Sancha swallowed an ordinary yawn. You are surrounded, Urza. The fourth leg went right after I climbed in. You destroyed hundreds of Phyrexians. Yet there are as many around you at the end as there had been in the beginning. I will change my design. 1,000 legs wouldn't be enough. You can't destroy every Phyrexian by fighting. You need allies and an army 3 times the size of Phyrexia. Tactics, strategy. Sancha thought of the heartblock, or the perfect target for a stealthy attack. And since when did you become my war consul, child? Urza could be disdainful. Strategy and tactics indeed. She needed to be careful when she mentioned the heart vault. Tonight, while Urza was blind and she was exhausted, wasn't the right time to reveal her discoveries. Another yawn escaped, entirely normal, without the mnemonic. The cyst was just a lump in her stomach. Sleep, child. I am grateful. I underestimated my enemy. I'll never do that again. Sancha was too tired to celebrate what little victory she'd achieved. She fell asleep thinking that she'd be alone when she woke. She was, but Urza hadn't gone far. With nothing more than grass, twigs, and small stones, Sancha's companion had recreated the forest sphere battleground in an area no more than 2 square paces. His dragon made from twigs and woven grass, towering over the other replicas in precisely the proportion she'd remembered. She'd expected to move. I'm odd, she admitted before her shadow fell across Urza's small wondered. You must be feeling better. As good as a fool can feel. It was a comment that begged questions, but Urza had learned to tread softly through confusion. You can see again? Yes. He looked up, black pupils, hazel irises, white sclera. You've had the right of it, Sancha. Burn that name out of my mind. As soon as I did, I began to feel like myself again. Ignorant and foolish. No one was hurt. No planes were damaged. A few years. The priest will be a long time repairing the damage. And you destroyed a score of their dragons and wyvern. Better than I expected, honestly. But not good enough. If I'd come down here, or to touch the ground behind the stone furnace, then quickly rearrange the delicate figures. If I had a wall of fire at my back, and then they couldn't have encircled me. Sancha started a new way. How would that have been better? With the furnaces behind you, they'd have held in one place almost from the start. Urza gave her a look that sparkled. She changed her stomach. Change the subject. Are we staying here while you build another dragon? No. The multiverse is real, Sancha. At least the other plane I'd ever found was real. Until yesterday, when I found Phyrexia. Going there and leaving, those were walking strides, like I'd never taken before. As if I'd leaped a vast chasm in a sudden bound. The chasm, I now realized, is everywhere, and Phyrexia is its far side. No matter where we are, we're only one leap from our enemy, and it from us. Even so, I'd feel better when I put a few knots in my trail. She had no argument with that plan. Then what? Another dragon? An argy? Allies? I found something yesterday, Urza. Something I thought was probably lies. I found my heart. Sancha slid her hand into her boot. The amber continued to glow. She offered it to Urza. That is, well, it's not your heart, Sancha. He didn't take it. Your heart beats behind your ribs, child. The Phyrexians lied to you. They took your past and your future, but they didn't take your heart. Urza guided her empty hand to her breastbone. There. Can you feel it? She nodded. All flesh had a blood heart in its breast. Newts in the flame of breath had their hearts until completed. This is different, she insisted, and described the vault where countless hearts shivered. We are connected to our hearts. We are taught that the ineffable keeps watch over our hearts, and records her errors on the surface. Too many errors, and she drew a line against her throat. Urza took the amber and held it to the sun. Xantcha couldn't see his face or his eyes, but a strangeness not unlike the between worlds tightened around her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't even muster the strength or will to gasp, until Urza lowered his hand. His face, when he turned towards her again, was not pleased. Of all abominations, this is the greatest. Urza held the amber above her outstretched hand, but did not release it. I would not call it a heart, yet it falls short of a power stone. I can imagine no purpose for it, except the one you describe. And you know where the vault is? Xantcha sensed Urza had asked a critical question, and her life might depend on her answer. She might have lied. If she'd had, would it satisfy him? I knew it was somewhere in the Faint of Flesh. You didn't tell me? I didn't want to die with all the rest of Phyrexia. I wasn't certain. I thought you'd laugh and call me a child again, and I would be too ashamed to follow you. Not quite an answer, but the truth, and apparently satisfactory. Urza dropped the answer into her hands without conscious thought. Xantcha clutched against her blood heart. I wouldn't have, Xantcha began, then stopped abruptly and looked down at her grass-and-trick dragon. No. Very possibly your concerns were justified. I do not imagine abominations and have discouraged you, thinking you imagined them. I allowed myself to forget that your mind is empty. Affections have no imagination. He crushed the dragon beneath his boot. Another mistake, another error. Forgive me, Misha. I cannot see when I need to see, and opportunities slipped away from me. If only I could relive yesterday instead of tomorrow. You can go back as soon as you restored your strength. If I could find the vault. Urza shuddered. They know me now. Your ineffable knows me. I cannot return to Phyrexia, not without absolute certainty of success and overwhelming strength. For the sake of vengeance, I must be cautious. I cannot make any more mistakes. I would be found out before I set foot on your first sphere. Xantcha kept her mouth shut. It wasn't her first sphere. Urza had powers that Phyrexia coveted, but it was oddly reluctant to use them. He had to overwhelm whatever lay behind him, and when he could make one of his mistakes, that mistake became a fortress. I could go. I have an ambulator. She lifted the hem of her tunic, revealing the small black disc tucked beneath her belt. If you made a smaller dragon, I could turn it loose on the vault. Urza smiled. Your courage is laudable, child, but you couldn't hope to succeed. We'll talk no more of it. He reached for the portal. Xantcha retreated, folding her arms defensively over her belly. Come, child. You have no need for such an artifact. It's beyond your understanding. Let me have it. I'm not a child, she mourned, the least incendiary comment seething on the back of her tongue. You see, simply having a Phyrexian artifact so close to me taints you, as that name yesterday threatened to taint me. You have the strength to resist its corruption. You become willful. Between that and your heart, you're overwhelmed, Xantcha. I should take both from you, for your own safety, but I'll leave your heart, if you give me the ambulator. It's mine, Xantcha protested and rolled up her lip. She'd seen born children in her travels, and recognized her behavior. Urza didn't have to stir another word. Xantcha handed the ambulator over. Thank you, Xantcha. I will study it closely. Urza held the ambulator between his fingertips, where it vanished. Perhaps he would study it. Perhaps he would find a way to add its properties to her assist. Whichever or whatever, Xantcha didn't think she'd see it again. But she kept her heart. Urza could have everything else, not that. He'd walk through 2 more worlds that day, and 2 more the next, and the next after that, making knots in their trail. After 2 score worlds and a half as many days, Xantcha swore the next would be her last. She let go of his hands and remained behind. Any world would be better than another between-world passage. But the next world was yellow gas, wind, and lightning, that seemed particularly attractive to her, armor. And the world after that had no air. Urza made an underground chamber, where Xantcha could breathe without her armor and catch up on her sleep. They came to a swamp with cone-shaped insects as long as her forearm, an abundance of frog. Not Xantcha's favorite sort of place. It reminded her of Phyrexia's first sphere. But she could breathe and eat, and the water, though brackish, didn't make her sick. This is far enough for me, she announced when Urza held out his hand. I don't need to visit every other world. Only a few more, Urza protested. He began to pace. Since Phyrexia, his relentlessness had steadily worsened until he could scarcely stand still. He didn't even try to sleep. I'm tired, she told him. You slept last night. Last night? When was last night? Where was last night? The world with the yellow trees? The one with the two suns? I'm going to stay put long enough to see the seasons change. Farmer, Ursa chided her, an indistinct improvement over child. And the truth as well. She'd spent too much time scratching into Phyrexia's sterile soil not to appreciate worlds where plants grew naturally. I want a home. So do I. An admission she hadn't expected. It's here, Xantcha. Domeria. Home. I can feel it every time we walk, but at least every step, a darkness blocks me. Darkness was here the last time before I found you. It was nothing like I'd encountered before. I was sure it would pass, but it hasn't. It's still here. Stronger than before. Like a knife? She asked, remembering the rooms of newts trapped on the other side of the broken portals. A knife? No. It's as if the multiverse itself has shattered, as if Doneria and all the planes that are bound to it have been broken apart. I've walked all around, approaching it from every vantage, yet every time it's the same. There's a darkness that is cold and repels me. I've been making a map in my mind, a shape beyond words. When it's done, I'll know that Dominaria is completely sealed for me and Phyrexia. It's my fault, you know. It's not merely vengeance that I require for Phyrexia. I require atonement. The Phyrexians corrupted and destroyed my brother. That's vengeance. But we, my brother and I, let them back into Domeria when we destroyed the Thran safeguards. The land itself has not forgiven me, won't forgive me until I've atoned for my errors by destroying Phyrexia. Dominaria locks me out as it locks up the Phyrexians. I cannot go home until what I have done, what even the Thran could do, destroys Phyrexia. I want to go home, Xantcha, and you, who cannot remember where you're born, cannot know true homesickness as I know it. I have not thought it would be so difficult. The land does not forgive. It has sealed itself against me, but it has sealed itself against Phyrexia too, and though my heart aches, I am content with my exile, knowing that my home is safe. Xantcha rubbed her temples. There was truth, usually tangled through Urza's self-centered delusions. Searcher priests don't walk between worlds, she said carefully, when she thought she had the wheat separated from the chaff. When conversations touched Mishra, Dominaria, or the mysterious Thran, Urza's moods became less predictable than they usually were. They use ambulators, but I don't know how they set the stones to find new worlds. Maybe you cannot be quite certain that Donaria is safe. I am certain, he insisted. Her thoughts raced along by tangents. You figured out how to set the stones in my amulator. Yes. I set it for Donaria, and it was destroyed. Xantcha's mind went dark. There was much she could have said, and no reason to say it. She turned away with a sigh. When I know, beyond doubt, that Domeria is inaccessible, then we will look for a hospitable plane. I mean to take your advice, Xantcha. I will build an army 3 times the size of Phyrexia, and ambulators large enough to transport them by the thousands. I examined your ambulator quite thoroughly before it was destroyed, and I can make you another one, once I find the right materials, and I can make it better. Urza expected her to rejoice, so she tried. She took his armor and followed to a few more worlds, 33, before he was satisfied that Donaria was inaccessible, beyond what he called a shard of the multiverse. Urza insisted that compared to the multiverse, 1,000 worlds could be properly termed a few worlds. The multiverse meant little to her. Urza's efforts to explain the planes and the nexi that composed it meant less, but the fact that Urza did try to explain it meant a lot. I need a friend, he explained. One lonely night on a world where the air was old and nothing remained alive. I need to talk with someone who has seen what I have seen, some of it, enough to listen without going numb from despair. And after I have talked, I need to hear a voice that's not my own. But you never listen to me. I always listen, Xantcha, and you are rarely correct. I cannot replace what the Phyrexians took away from you. Your mind is mostly empty, and what isn't empty is filled with Phyrexian rubbish. You recite their lies because you don't know better. Your advice, child, is untrustworthy, but you yourself are my friend. Urza hadn't called her child since they walked away from Dominaria, and Xantcha didn't like to think that after so much time together, he continued to distrust her. But after a friendship, true friendship, was a gift not to be overlooked. I will never betray you, Xantcha said softly, taking his hand between hers. It was like a stone at first, flexible stone. Then it softened, warmed, and became flesh. I want nothing more than be your friend, Urza. He smiled a rare and mortal gesture. I'll take you wherever you want, but I'd rather you wanted to remain with me until we find a plane that satisfies both of us. Late that night, when the fire was cold and Urza had gone wandering, as he usually did while she slept, Urza sharpened her knife and made an incision in her left flank, the side opposite to her cyst. She tucked her amber heart into the gasp, sealed it with a paste of ashes, then bound it tightly with cloth torn from her spare clothes. Urza knew immediately. She'd been a fool to think he wouldn't. I swallowed it my own way, she told him, in no mood for a lengthy artifact. It's part of me now, where it belongs. I'll never lose it, no matter where you take me. Xantcha wanted a world where she could pretend she'd been born. Never mind that. By their best guess, she was living near the end of the 6th century, no more than 7 decades younger than Urza himself. Urza wanted a plane where he could recruit an army. Their wants, she thought, would have been incompatible, and perhaps they wouldn't have been if Urza had been able to sleep. To give him his due, Xantcha granted that Urza tried to sleep. He knew he needed to dream, but whenever he attempted that treacherous descent from wakefulness, he found nightmares itself, screaming nightmares that spread from the stench of rotting fish on a summer's day, until anyone with a half-day's journey could see the flames of Phyrexia and the metal and flesh, and the apparition that Urza called Mishra. Strangers did not welcome them for long. Recruiting an army was impossible. When she was lucky, Xantcha nursed a single harvest in the ground before they walked again. When they found a truly hospitable world with abundant rich soil, a broad swath of temperate climates, and a wealth of vigorous cultures, Xantcha suggested that Urza build himself a tower on the lowest island in the largest sea. He could walk to such a tower without difficulty and sleep, she'd hope, without disturbing anyone. Urza called the word Moag, and it became the home Xantcha had dreamed about. He built a sheer-walled tower with neither doors nor windows, and filled it with artifacts. Within a decade, its rocky shores had become a place of prophecy and learning, where Urza warned pilgrims of Phyrexian evil and laid the foundations for the army he hoped eventually to raise. Xantcha built a cottage with a garden, and the seasons when it didn't need tending, she yawned and went exploring. Urza had made her another summoning crystal, which she wore in her friendship, but never expected to use. They met at his island, wherever the moon was full, nowhere else, no other time. They became friends who could talk about anything, because they knew which questions to avoid. For 30 years, life, Xantcha's apparently immortal life, could not have been better, until the bright autumn day on Moag's most intriguing southern continent, when Xantcha caught the unexpected, unforgettable scent of glistening oil. She followed it to the source, the nearly refurbished temple of the fire god, with a taste of gold and blood sacrifice. A blowing flesh novice sat beside a burning alms box. For the heath of the poor, he said, and although it looked like an extortion, Xantcha threw a copper into the flames. She yawned out her armor before entering the sanctuary. Trouble found her, one Phyrexian to another, before she reached the firebound altar. Wrapped in concealing robes, it showed only its face, which had the jowls and grizzled beard of a mature man, and the reek of the compleated. In its gloved hand, it carried a gnarled wooden staff that immediately roused Xantcha's suspicions. She had a small sword on her hips. A mace would have been more useful, but out of keeping with the rest of her dandy disguise. "Where have you been?" it asked in a Phyrexian whisper that could have been mistaken for an insect whispering. "Waiting," Xantcha replied with a new soft inflection. "Waiting to see what would happen next." It came faster than she expected. There was a priest of some new type inside those robes, and his staff was as false as its face. A web of golden power struck her armor. The priest wasn't expecting surprises, not from a newt. Xantcha kicked it in the midsection and again on the chin as it fell. Its head separated from its neck, leaving its flesh behind. Xantcha understood instantly why Urza could not purge his brother's last memory from his mind. She reached out for the wooden staff. She reached for the not wooden staff and realized, belatedly, that there had been a witness. Phyrexian witnesses. 4 of them were surging out of the recesses to block her path. They all had staves. She lost the advantage of surprise. The sanctuary roof had a smoke bed above the altar. Sancha grabbed the priest's head instead of the staff as she braced herself against the agony of the ringing spheres from the cyst, where the army was still in place around her. There was blood in the sphere, but it resisted the efforts of the Phyrexians and their staffs to bring it down, as they expanded and lifted her out of immediate danger. Willpower got Sancha drifting silently just above the rooftops south of the temple, but willpower couldn't lift her high enough to catch the winds that would carry her to true safety beyond the walls. The cyst couldn't maintain both the sphere and the armor for long. Already, knife pains ripped through her stomach, and her mouth had already filled with blood. Woozy and desperate, Sancha went to the ground in the foulest maiden she could find, a gaping pit beyond a boneyard. She thought she'd die when the sphere dissolved on contact with the maiden's scum, and she found herself shoulder deep in fermented filth. With a death grip on the metal head, if she dropped it, she could never have the courage to fish it out. Sancha released her armor as well, and hoped that controlled nausea wouldn't prevent the cyst from recharging itself. By sunset, when swarms of insects took her for the evening meal, Sancha was ready to surrender to any Phyrexian brave enough to haul her out of her hiding place. She thought about gods and the inconvenience of not believing in any of them, then filled her lungs for a yawn. With a single sharp pain that threatened for a horrible moment to fold her in half, the cyst discharged. Sancha gasped her way through the mnemonic that created the sphere, and just when she thought she had no endurance left, it began to swell. She was seen. Certainly she was scented, rising above the shamble's roof, and slowly at first, then faster, and the fresh air lifting her up. There were screams, clanging alarms, and from the open roof of the Fire God's temple, diaphanous gout of black sorcery that fell short of its moving target. The winds blew westward into the sunset. Sancha let them carry her higher and higher until the moon was high, before she began the long tack that would take her to Urza's tower. The moon was a waxing crescent when Sancha sat down on the tower's roof 5 nights later. Urza wasn't expected her and wasn't pleased to have her within his tower's walls. Sancha had abandoned her clothes and scrubbed herself raw with sand and water, without quite winning herself of the maiden's aroma. But Urza reserved his great displeasure for the metal-fleshed head she stood on his work table. "Where did you find that?" he demanded, and stood like a stone, while Sancha raced through the account of her misadventure in the southern city. "You struck it down before witnesses, and you brought it here as a trophy? What were you thinking?" Urza's enraged eyes lit up the chamber. They around him shimmered with between-worlds lights. Sancha thought it was wise to armor herself, but when she opened her mouth, Urza enveloped her in a stiffening paralysis. Naked and defenseless, she endured a scathing lecture about the stupidity of newts who expose themselves to enemies and jeopardize the delicate plans of their friends. "I smelled glistening oil," Sancha countered, when towards dawn, Urza released her from his spell. She was angry by then and incautious. "I was curious. I didn't know it came from Phyrexian priests. Maybe it was just a coincidental cooking sauce. I didn't plan to destroy Phyrexian, but it seemed better than letting it kill me. And as for witnesses, well, I am sorry about that. I didn't notice they were standing there until it was too late. And I brought the head because I thought it'd be better proof, because I wasn't sure he'd believe me without it. Should I let myself be killed or captured? Maybe I should have dropped the head on the roof before they attacked. Would they have been better, wiser on my part?" A silver globe appeared in Urza's hand. He cocked his arms. "Go ahead. Do it. Then what? Make me another mistake you can mourn? You can't change the past, Urza. The Phyrexians were here before I found them. Empty-headed fool that I am, I thought you wanted to know whatever I could learn. However, I learned it. Waste not, want not. I thought you'd be glad I survived." The globe vanished in a shower of bright red sparks. "I am truly, but they have found me. Phyrexians are here, Urza. It's not necessarily the same place. How do you suppose they found Dominaria in the first place? Search your police, look for more artifacts. That thing," Urza gestured at the metal-head flesh, "had a face no one would look at, twice at. The searcher priests had found a nice little world ripe for the plucking. They set themselves up in the Fire God's cult because that's what Phyrexia needs, more than artifacts. It's ore for its furnaces, and Morag's a metal-rich world. They'll destroy Morag, Sancha. It will all happen again. Well, isn't that what you've been waiting for? A chance to right old wrongs? No, the price is too high." "Urza," Sancha lost patience with him, "forget about listening to me. Do you ever listen to yourself?" He stared at her, mortal-eyed, but as if she was a stranger, rather than companion of the centuries. Go, Zancha. I need to think. I will come for you at the full moon. Maybe I don't want to walk away from all this. Maybe I want my vengeance. Go, child. You're disturbing me. I must think. I'll tell you my decision when I've made it, not before. They were back to child again, and he had made his decision. Zancha had once been with Urza too long, and not to know what he was like, and when he was lying to her. He made a hole in the roof, and she took advantage of it. She gathered the weapon she had discarded in a sack that held her traveling stash of gold and gems. These things that the maiden had damaged at all. Only the sash desperately needed replacement. So she took one of Urza's and swapped the contents before yawning out of the spear. The hole closed as soon as she passed through it. Morning had come. A beautiful morning with mackerel clouds, streaking north by northeast. The direction Zancha needed if they were going back to her cottage. But she decided after heartbeats thought that she wasn't. Zancha set her mouth salt to the Fire City, God's city. Urza was going to leave Moag, and despite her threats, Zancha knew she'd go with him. But if he intended to simply leave, they could have walked already. They left another world with less warning. No, Urza had some plan, and Zancha wanted to witness it. As soon as Zancha reached the coast, she found a prosperous villa and sneaked into it by moonlight. She left 2 silver coins and another world's garnet brooch on the nightstand, in exchange for her pick of the young heir's wardrobe. His breeches were tight, and his boots too big, but overall she considered it a fair swap. She didn't linger until sunrise to learn the household's opinion. Zancha scuffed up her fine clothes when she reached the southern city, and wove a tale of tragedy and coincidence for the apothecary, whose shop had the best view of this fire god's temple. An owl-eyed merchant didn't believe a word of what Zancha said, but she could read, count, and compound a script better than either of his journeymen. He took her in with a promise of 2 meals a day, one hot, one cold, and a night palace across the threshold, which is what she'd wanted from the start. She'd settle in to wait. 1 day, 2 days, 3, 4. Urza came on the 5th, or rather, a ball of fire descended from the stars during the 5th night. It struck the temple with hideous force. Masonry, stone, and burning timbers flew across the plaza, splashing shutters and windows. Zancha got her sword from its hiding place, bid an unobserved farewell to the apothecary, then went hunting for Phyrexians through the smoke. Zancha found a few, as terrified as any born folk, or more so, since glistening oil burned with a hot blue flame. She put an end to their misery, and with her armor to protect her from both flames and smoke, made her way into sanctuary. The journeyman had succumbed to her questions, and told her where the fire god's priests had their private quarters, which was where Zancha expected to find and steal another ambulator. She found a passage back to Phyrexia, but it was like any other ambulator she'd seen before. Instead of a bottomless black pool, the flesh-faced priest had a solid-seeming disc that rose edgewise from a stone floor. Face on, it was as black as the ambulator Zancha was familiar with. From behind, it simply wasn't there. One thing hadn't changed. It was still a palm-sized paddle with several black jewels where the disc emerged from the floor. Since she couldn't roll the standing portal up and take it with her, Zancha smashed the paddle with her sword. Smoke and screams belched out from the black disc before it collapsed. Zancha guessed she'd closed it just in time. A pair of lines gouged into the stone wall was all that remained when the smoke cleared. She was rummaging through shelves and cabinets, hoping to find a familiar ambulator, when the air grew heavy. The other kind of between-worlds passage, the Urza's kind of walking passage, was open. "It's me," she shouted as he came into view. "Zancha, what are you doing here? I could have killed you." They never had established whether Urza's armor was protector from Urza's wrath or Urza's mistake. "I came for the ambulator. I knew they'd have one, and wasn't sure you'd think to roll it. She had it when she rode the dragon to Phyrexia. It was a new kind," she admitted. "I couldn't roll it up." Urza stared at the lines on the floor. "No, it was a very old kind. Did you destroy it?" He was so calm and reasonable, it worried her. "Yes, I broke the gems. There was screaming, then nothing." "Well, perhaps it is enough. If not, I have left my mark above, and I will leave a trail. Are you ready to walk, or are you staying here?" "You want the Phyrexians to follow us?" Urza nodded, smiling, and held out his hand. "I want them to pursue us with all their strength and leave Moag in peace." Urza took his hand and said, I don't think it works that way. They were between worlds, and her words were lost. Zancha never knew if the second part of Urza's plan bore fruit, but the first was successful behind his wildest dream. He stopped laying a deliberate trail after the fourth world became beyond Morag, but that didn't stop the searcher priests and the Avenger teams they led. Sometimes she and Urza got a year's respite between attacks, never more. Urza reached into his past for centuries he called Yodians. Never failed guardians shaped from whatever materials a new world offered, clay, stone, or wood. He'd walked her to ice worlds before. They were dark, airless places where the sun was locked among the stars, and ice as hard as steel. Save for the gas worlds where there was no solid ground at all, ice worlds were the least hospitable worlds in the multiverse. They never stayed long on ice, no matter how close the pursuit. Then years after Moag, by Urza's reckoning, he found a world where the ice was melting and the air was cool but breathable. Once it had been a world like Moag. Whole forests and cities could be glimpsed through the ice when there was light was right. Now it was a brutal place, with men who'd forgot that cities were. Zancha thought it was inhospitable as any airless world, but Urza disagreed. She was disinclined to argue. She hadn't slept soundly since they left Moag. The simple act of closing his eyes was enough to trigger the nightmares, hallucinations of the past, of the ineffable. To Zancha's abiding horror, the forgotten name had returned to Urza's memory, and came easily to him whenever he battled through his nightmares. Years without proper sleep had taken their toll. Urza's restlessness had grown into a sort of frenzy. He was never still, always pacing or wringing his hands. He babbled constantly. Zancha fashioned wax earplugs so she could sleep, but fractions on their trail, they never strayed far apart. And Urza needed her. Without her, Urza often didn't know what was real from what was not. Without her gentle nagging, he would have forgotten to carve the Yodians, or given them the appropriate orders. Without her willingness to brave his hallucinations, he would have gouged the gemstone ice from his skulls and put it into his memory. Sitting on the opposite side of the fire with a score of icy Yodians clanking patrols through the frigid night, Zancha wondered if she should let him die. They were each other over 800 years old, and though she could still pass for an unbearded youth, Urza looked his age, or worse. The arcane power that enabled him to change his appearance at will had become erratic. A night's night to night, even when he wasn't hallucinating, Urza seemed to be surrounded by a between-worlds miasma. Viewed from some angles, he had no substance at all, just seething light that hurt her eyes. "Will you eat? Can you eat?" Zancha asked gently, trying to ignore the way the hearth flames were visible through his low robes. Food was no substitute for sleep and dreams, but it helped keep Urza looking mortal. She seasoned the stew pot with the aromatic herbs that had tempted him before. But it didn't work this time. "I'm hollow," he said. A disturbingly accurate assessment. "Food won't fill me, Zancha. Eat all you can. Pack the rest. I feel the eyes of the multiverse upon us." Zancha lost her appetite. When Urza thought the multiverse was watching him, fractions usually weren't far behind. She forced down a small portion, and the between worlds was easier on a near empty stomach, and filled a water skin with the rest. The ice-shaped Yodians were almost as restless as Urza. Zancha slung the water skin and other essentials from the shoulder harness and checked her weapons. The second best way to deal with fractions was to batter them apart. She'd long since abandoned her Moag sword in favor of a short club with a jagged chunk of pure iron for its head. The best way to deal with French-skinned Avengers, however, was to hide, and let Urza demolish them with sorcery and artifice. Then wait until he shaped himself into a man again. Waiting was a difficult part, and as the years and worlds and ambulances accumulated, Urza never had a problem vanquishing the Avengers. But increasingly he lost himself in the aftermath. 2 ambushes ago, he devolved into a pillar of rainbow light that shimmered for 3 days before condensing into a solid, familiar form. Considering the brutal backwater worlds it frequented, Zancha desperately wanted an ambulator, and the wherewithal to set its black stones for a hospitable world. She'd raised the subject as often as she dared, but she didn't include a night with the ice Yodians clattering with crystals across the shadows. The ambush came at dawn, in gusts of hot, sour Phyrexian wind. There were a score of them, not counting the 2 searcher priests who squatted beside the flat black ambulator. This time the Avengers resembled huge turtles with bowl-shaped carapaces, the 4 blood shovel-like feet, ideal for churning through snow and ice. Instead of claws or teeth, their weapons were beams of dark radiance that shot through an opening where a turtle's head were emerged from its shell. Xantcha left the turtles for Urza and the Yodians. Safe in her armor and screaming loudly, she charged the searcher priests instead, hoping to steal their ambulator. They took one look at her and retreated into the ambulator, rolling it up behind him, abandoning the Avengers. She had cursed them for their cowardice, but the searchers were hard to replace. They were subtle for Phyrexians, far more subtle than the Avengers were, because they were so powerful. They were also stupid. She supposed the searchers would bring reinforcements, although, so far, once they left, they'd straight gone. But the other skirmishes had been over sooner. Ice was not the ideal defense when the Avengers' weapon was heat. The Yodians had been utterly destroyed without bringing down a single Phyrexian, which meant that Urza had to face them all. He had the skill and the power, though the turtles were a bit tougher and nastier than they'd be in the last ambush, as if Phyrexian was learning from its failures, a frightening notion in and of itself. There were only 8 Avengers left. Urza had destroyed 2 of them with dazzling streaks of raw power from his jeweled eyes. No one learned faster than Urza. He never tired nor depleted his resources. As long as there was substance beneath his feet, or stars in the sky overhead, Urza the Artificer could work his uniquely potent magic. Then suddenly, his strikes were indecisive. A turtle scuttled forward unshelled and knocked Urza backwards, the first time Urza had seen him touched in battle. He destroyed it with a gun of flames, but not before the other turtles pelted him with blasts of darkness. After that, Xantcha expected Urza to make short work of enemies. Instead, he became vaporous, a mild light of shadows. A turtle pod passed directly through him. Xantcha thought it was another Urza's tactical surprise, until she saw his counter-strike pass through the turtle. Xantcha had imagined the end many times, but she never thought the end would come from turtles on an ice-bound world. Her armor would protect her, probably. Her club would have almost certainly have no effect on the Avengers meant to destroy Urza the Artificer. But Xantcha would sooner face her personal end right here, right now, than risk capture and return to Phyrexia. Or even worse, eternity on the ice-bound world. She leapt into the back of the nearest turtle and took aim at the forward gap in its carapace. The turtle proved quite agile, bucking like an unbroken horse in its effort to throw Xantcha off. She held on till 2 of the Avengers began to target her instead of Urza. The armor held, barely. Xantcha felt the dark heat of dark magic, front and back, and the crack of her ribs as they began to break, one by one, under the hammer and anvil presser. The last thing Xantcha saw was Urza, brighter than the sun, and not a bad sight to carry into the darkness. Thank you for listening to Chapter 12 of Planeswalker. Please like, subscribe, and follow on YouTube and your chosen podcast platform.